So thank you for allowing me to speak and for asking me to speak. And Bill has told a number of people about stories that we tell, but generally that's after I've had a drink or two. And that's a whole different thing than it is than telling, getting up and speaking in front of everyone. But can you hear me okay? I'll stay close. I'm going to stay close. Here we go. So I'll start it off with a joke, and I always screw the jokes up. But this is for my benefit, not yours. So there's this, the doctor's in the field, and he's tired. He's past COVID and insurance and everything else. He's been a proctologist, and he just said, I'm done with this. And so he enrolled, some of you all might have heard this, so forgive me, but he enrolls down the Seattle Maritime Institute. He loves boats. He's had a sailboat, had a powerboat, and he wants to get a mechanics course in. So he takes the course, and one of his jobs is to rebuild the 671 Jimmy Diesel. And he gets in there and he works on it, and he does everything. He gets the bearings and this. He makes a few mistakes, but it's his final exam. It's finally done, and he gets his grade back, and the instructor, he knew he'd screwed up a lot of things, but he did okay. The instructor gave him 120% on the test. And he goes, how is that possible? The instructor said, man, you didn't do the head quite right, and the valves are a little bit off, and the bearings a little bit bigger than the clearance. But the fact that you did it all through the exhaust port, that gives you full tilt So forgive me if you've heard that much before. That's about the only one I know that I can say without screwing up. So I wanted to say thank you again. There's a lot of history in this club, and you hear about it, the 60, the 50, the 40 pins. I think about the effort that it goes to volunteering, to providing, 7 years in your program, work out the chairs and then on the board. I appreciate that, and this what we're going to talk about today, it has a lot to do with the stories we tell ourselves and the effort it goes into living this life and to living out those stories that we do tell ourselves. It's going to talk a little bit about the generations that have gone before, because our stories start not with ourselves, they start with what was passed down to us and be a parent or grandparent and all those things that went into it. And then we take those stories, some are good, some are tough, not always good and bad, not one way or the other, and we take those stories and then we create our own out of them. And so I look around this room, and I can guarantee you all of you have your unique stories that I could learn so much from. But I was asked to speak today about our story, about our family, about the maritime industry that we're in, and you're a yacht club. So today the story will be about some of the things we've learned, some of the experiences that we've had in the maritime field. But I know that each one of you could sit down, and I would learn so much from each one of you in your own chosen life and story that you told yourself and that you lived out. So someday maybe I'll get to meet more of you than I have already today. But here we go. We'll get started on this. I'll just preface this, and that is that we generally don't sit down as a family and talk about all the things that we've done. It's kind of unusual. One, in our industry, what we do, we work around the world, and we are a special missions family. So if there's a unique, something that needs to be done in some place where we're small, so I don't want you to make this sound like we're a large company. We're not. We're a small family business. But we work everywhere from, we worked in Somalia, in Nigeria, the East Coast, up in Europe, up to the Arctic, out to the Chukchi Sea, out to the Russian borders. We have a ship right now passing through the Panama Canal as we speak today. We have ships on the East Coast, out of Charleston, doing fiber optic surveys. And then we have vessels here in Seattle. And so we tend to go, we're opportunistic. We make our living taking risks and providing maritime solutions that other people think are probably foolish at times or hard. And so we take on that risk, and then at times we succeed and at times we fail. But hopefully we have more successes and failures, and allows us to be here and enjoying your company. So I'll get started. Let me click this thing. I might have to repurpose that. Oh, there we go. So that is, can we see? Okay, that is aboard a ship that my family grew up on. I'm the last of 6 children. And my mother there, I was born to my mother when she was 45. And she lived on the ship, had already been living on the ship for about 10 years. And she was ready to give birth. A few days before she was ready to give birth, the doctor on the ship, I grew up on a medical missionary ship. And the doctor said, I want you to go to Seattle and have Daniel. So I was put on an airplane, and an old mission seaplane, an old Cessna, and I was flown down the coast, and then we landed here in Lake Union. And she went up to Swedish, and I was born, and then how many days later, they put me back on an airplane back in the back seat of that old Cessna. And we flew back to the Willishank, and that was my home for the next 17 years. I took this photo, it's kind of out of context, but it was taken a long time ago, about 15, 18 years ago, but our family's on the mast of one of the boats that we refit. In fact, one of your members, Steve McBride, helped me on this project in refitting the ship, and I'll tell you about that a little bit later. But I brought this photo because down on the starboard corner, the lower right-hand corner, is a little white-haired lady, and that's my mother at 92. And she got up on that mast at 92, and that was the culture in our, and she was dancing and having a great life until 97. So that was a culture we grew up in. Let's do it. And it was so I'll tell you a little bit more about that later, but there we are. This is, I'm gonna play this for you, just so we kind of do present day. It's blowing there. This is Hurricane Ida 2 weeks ago. The ship that's gonna collide with this is 270 feet long, it's almost 75 feet wide, weighs 3,500 tons. It's abandoned, it broke loose. It's blowing 80 knots, we're near the eye of the hurricane, and it's gonna collide with one of our ships, the Ocean Veritas, or the Ocean Valor. And it was taken by my son Daniel, who was here, who's a project manager. So what we did is, when the hurricane came in, we flew people in. Daniel flew in with 30 men, and we already had some people on the ground because 2 of our ships were getting ready to depart. The hurricane was just an inconvenience for us. She'll now impale herself on another one of our ships, and that stern will go into her bow through 1/2-inch plate steel. And you'll see that in a moment. And it's talking about the stories, once again, the stories we tell ourselves. People that own this ship, they're from Nigeria. They just put $1 million into that crane that got demolished right there. It's a 100-ton crane. And they weren't prepared. They knew the hurricane was coming. They knew they needed to put more lines on the ship. They knew that they needed to do what was right in order to do what was right, to get the outcome that they want. And we in life often, sometimes we think we can take shortcuts. I know I've done it, and then I go, it didn't work out. Well, dummy, you've been a little more mindful, a little more careful. But that's an example. So now they did about $500,000 to $1 million worth of damage to our 2 ships. They're uninsured. And so now we'll have to decide, how do we get paid? Do we claim salvage or whatever? It just is an indicator of some of the things that we face in the maritime business, because there's so many risks that we don't have any control over as much as we would like to. Here's another. So within about 48 hours, we had 2 ships that we were working on, but then when we had calls from our people, and we have one business development fellow in Houston, whether it's in boardrooms or back rooms, the deal was made. And within about 3 days, we are now feeding 800 souls with accommodations and food, repairing 50,000 electrical repair people, doing 50,000 down telephone poles from Ida and transformers and so forth. So we have those 2 barges to the starboard side are 280-man camps, and then the 270-man on the red ship, the Ocean Intrepid. And so what we do is, once again, opportunistic. We take an opportunity, and we had to ramp up very quickly. I think we put in 500 tons of rock into because it's all bayou, so we had to have places for all the power trucks to land and all that. So, and yet, these are like pop-ups, is it pop-up stores, that just pop up and sell something, then they take off and go do something else? And we do that. My son here manages a lot of that, but and so does a large group of people that support us. And we're going to talk about family here in just a little bit, but just gave you some these are happening as we speak. In fact, So one of those barges, they wanted to move to Grand Isle, Louisiana. There's not power, there's no water, there's nothing. It's really devastating. And it's moving as we speak. There's tugs moving it as we speak right now. And normally the moorage for that barge is $175 a day here in Amelia, Morgan City area. We're moving it just a few hours away. They wanted $15,000 a day to moor the barge, and we negotiated a $6,700 a day rate. So we're talking about billionaires and millionaires, and there's got to be a word for hurricaneers, because there's a bundle of money made in the hurricane business as well as a lot of pain and suffering, of course. This is the ship, the Ocean Valor, that was damaged, and she is right now transiting the Panama Canal as we speak today. The crane that went on her, Daniel just finished, and that was the problem. That crane, that black crane, is being installed for a government contract that we're doing, and it weighs 200 tons. The crane is 200 tons. The steel to hold, and for people, guys and women who like mechanical engineering things, the steel, just the foundation in the ship, was almost 100 tons of steel and about 7,000 feet of welding. And so that's all being done right now in the last 8 weeks during COVID, and then Ida hit, and then the ship hit us, and then did damage to the Valor, which had to be repaired before we could leave. So just an idea of what we do as a family. So that's me. I'm about whatever I am, 4 or 5 years old on the wheel of the old Willis Shank. And we had electric steering, and when the power was on, we're not. And so am I steering? I don't know. I may have been just bullshit painted picture, but I'll tell you what I always did is I dreamed, because I lived on that boat as a child, and I didn't have other young people around me. I either got homeschooled, or all our family did. They either got homeschooled or didn't go to school. Our parents did not care about schooling. They didn't care about, you worked, you ran a ship, you could do anything, but school, forget school. So I didn't grow up with the social graces and skills. Engines I've been comfortable with, and ships and propellers and pitches, but so I did a lot of dreaming when I was young, and I dreamt about, well, a little bit older, but not that much older. I dreamt about swashbucklers and building things and maidens and falling in love. I just did. So I did. So this is the ship we grew up on. The upper picture is the World War II minesweeper when it was purchased out of Scow Bay, just south of Port Townsend. Some of you may know it. It's tucked in there. And it was a World War II wooden minesweeper. And the dad paid $10,000 for it, sold his roofing business, and turned it into, below was a medical missionary ship with 8 hospital beds, a surgery, and then a dentistry. And all of us, our family grew up around that. So my stateroom was about 50 feet, well, 12 feet from the dentist's office and 50 feet from the surgery. And when I grew up in my formative years, some of that had wound down, but not for my sisters and my brothers. And so they were always required to get up in the middle of the night. And there was a chapel in the back for 100. So we'd be in a village, and they'd have sing-alongs and everything else. And so all my family they'd play the trumpet or the trombone till midnight. None of the in the village would want to leave. And then they'd have to get up the next morning and make sure the toilets were clean, the sewage. You all have boats. You know what goes on with a boat. Well, take that and multiply that. Now you got a 136-foot ship with about 50 to 70 people living, and we have anywhere from 30 to 70 people living on it, and all the complexities that goes with that, and that was generally our life. This is the machinery space on the old ship, and as children, it was our job to watch the engines. That ladder on the port side, those rails were slick and clear, because when an alarm went off, and they went off often with a low oil pressure or a high temperature or something, you didn't, when the alarm, it was a klaxon, like a World War II klaxon that you think of in a movie. When it was off, you slid down those, your feet did not touch the rungs, because you knew it was life or death. You knew that you were in a remote place, and if you were had fire or the villages were flooding, and we were taught that the world is gonna end. Now, was it gonna end? Probably not. Was it fairly serious? Yes, it was. And I've taken that with me all my life, and my poor children have had to suffer from it, and my wife, because at times I always look at things like it's an emergency, and when it often isn't. On the other hand, that's also been a superpower for our family, as we've looked at things in a unique way that sometimes has an extra amount of stress added to it. But as a child, we would sleep on those engines inboard, and at times they were started with 600 pounds of air pressure. And they were unreliable governors, and so if you weren't careful, you had to start them up and bring them right to RPM. Their maximum RPM was 1,200, but you idle them at about 400. But what happened was if they got too much fuel because they'd been sitting around, the injectors would drip water into them, or diesel into them, they could run away. And when they ran away, they blew up. And so you kept a fire extinguisher next to you and a blanket to put around the air cleaner, and you would start those engines up and be ready to run at any time in case they took off. So that's where we grew up. Some of you appreciate that if you know Thetis Island, if you've been up to Thetis Island and Telegraph Harbor inside where the marine is. Well, outside is is Preedy Harbor. It's warm water, and you see the red house there, the old English tutor that's now Cape and Ray School. The dock up above, that was the mission's home. They got in 1952, they got a 1,000-acre facility for vocational training, and they raised pigs and they cut down timber. There was no ferry to the island. And you can see the provincial dock, the mission is taking it over with power scows and ships, and their airplanes came in there. And on the dock in front of Preedy, which is now for water skiing and playing out, here's the Willishank being worked on, and not the dock, the beach. The Willishank is being worked on. And they're doing what we did with that. You don't get away with that nowadays. So anyway, this is my dad. He was a dreamer. He was a dream builder, and a lot of people. He created a lot of wonderful ideas. A lot of people gave a lot of their lives for it. So when you ask someone to be part of the club and to donate their time, we have a special appreciation for that, because we saw people give up their lives and donate lives, not just money, but their lives for these ideas and these dreams. And so part of this talk is about what that means to all of us, right? So that's my brother Don Stabbert. Some of you may know him. He's in the Maritime, he has Salmon Bay Marine Center down there, and was working in Kirkland. He grew up on the ship as well. And that's the bow of the ship. On the port side, we're probably taking water from a waterfall. That's what we did. We go up to a waterfall, stick a pump in it, and then pull our water from the ocean, right, because there's so much fresh water there, and then fill our tanks. We ended up leaving the Pacific Northwest, British Columbia, and Alaska, and ultimately ended up in my formative years in the 60s down in California. And so the way to make a living on the starboard side, the right-hand side, is the Willishank, and we are marketing it for tours to Catalina. So we did that 26 miles across the sea, sunny Catalina, here we are. And so that is continental singers, and those are the types of things. We'd have 30 to 50 young people, high school, college, from a church or a school, and that's the ship down at Twin Harbors or one of the places. But those were my 10-year-old, 14-year-old years. And so now I've always been a good engineer, a good deckhand, I'm a good little worker, and I did everything that I was supposed to. I kept my nose out of trouble. But now I'm 12 or 13 years old, and my nose wants to get into trouble a lot. And we're on a boat right now with teenage girls that are 4 or 5 years older than us. I mean, the world was our oyster, but I had no social skills at all, and I just really wanted to get a good friend. So a chaplain at the local Navy base told my dad was looking always for free labor. He said, I'll tell you what, I'll get you some free labor from the base here, but you've got to take my son. He didn't say it was a pain in his ass, but he said he's causing me a lot of trouble. And Milt was a cool guy. So I'm just going to show you this. This is another one of my dad's adventures, and he bought a World War I dredge that used to dredge the Fraser River and the Santa Margarita, and then he got it for $5,000 in San Diego, and we as a family repaired it so he could go to Nicaragua and dredge and save villages and towns along the Mosquito Coast that were making $30 a year. He wanted to create an Alaska Marine Highway inside of all of Latin America, from the Yucatan down to Panama. So as a child, I went with him in outboards and dugouts and airplanes, and we mapped the area. They didn't have good maps, so you got some funding from AID. And then ultimately, with this ship burned crude oil, and so not diesel, it was a tar, and you had to heat the tar to get it liquid enough to inject into the boilers to create the steam, to create this 1911 engine and make it turn. This ship was fully operational by the time, and these are the things we did as children, by the time the Nicaraguan earthquake hit in 1971, and then the whole project was abandoned. So then we just pivoted and scrapped it. We just cut it all up and sold all the copper pieces, and that's what we lived on. So there's Milt on the port side, on the Willishank up on the bow, and here he is today. I was looking for a younger picture, and we have him, I couldn't find it. But that mustache he's got now at 67, he had that mustache at 14. The women loved it. I loved it. I mean, seriously, it was really, I looked like I was 10, he looked like he was 19. It was perfect. I hung around him, and here's the deal. He had the social skills, and people, he just had a way with people, and he still does today if you've met him. He's joined us in some of our trips, but he wanted freedom, right? He was constrained and living in Los Alamitos on the air station and all that. And here he came to live on a boat where it was unlimited freedom. We could do anything we wanted. No one cared. And so we got into all kinds of trouble from, making 10 or 15 people throw up off the back of the ship as we're crossing to sinking the skiff with 8 girls in it. You had a 21st century resort that the bottom came out of in Cherry Cove. And then, I mean, you get it. Anything you can think of, the 10 things we need to really apologize for, we did. But we were in charge because it was Milt and I, my mother and dad, and maybe one other person running that 136-foot minesweeper with 50 to 70 kids on board. They'd have some volunteers for the galley and stuff, but we did everything. We stood the anchor watches at night. We cleaned the sewage lines up. 4-inch sewage lines would plug with a flapper valve on the side, and every once in a while they got stuck and they were 6 inches under the water. You'd go down with a broom handle and you'd put some nails in the end of the broom handle and you'd swim up to it. You'd put the broom handle in, and as soon as that let go, you swam as fast as you could. So, you name it, we saw it. Right? So, but it was a lot of fun. We had a lot of fun. So I met my wife Cheryl when I was 17, and she had already been volunteering in Latin America for a few years during the summer, so she was an international traveler already at that. Her parents had divorced, and she'd chosen to put her energy somewhere else. And family was taking 2,000 tons of medical supplies down to Nicaragua, so she came to volunteer. And boy, I saw her, and we started talking, and we had a lot in common. And she was an adventurous person, and here we are today. So it was a blessing. That's us on the Coos Bay, and the Coos Bay is right below. It's a weird picture, but that's a 300-foot old freighter that Dad got donated to him, and he was going to start a Universidad Maritima, which is what that university down there. And he was hoping to get all the nations from Mexico down to Panama and maybe Colombia to participate. But they fought over soccer games. If they had a difference in a soccer game, they'd go to war. So how are you going to possibly do this? So it wasn't long. So there's Cheryl in the galley of the ship when she first volunteered. I'm working on an engine part or something. But ultimately, the ship ended up in Latin America hauling cargo. And so Dad had to, here's a missionary guy, and he knows boats. He loves the water. But now he's hauling cargo in the mosquito fleet in villages and islands from Colombia up to Mexico, all throughout that area, and he's out of his league. And the captains he hires, they're smuggling heroin. He took me, the chief engineer had a nervous breakdown. I went down there to help him out for maybe a month or 6 weeks. And Mobile, Alabama is 140 degrees in the engine room. The ship had no air conditioning to start with. It had no generator power. The generators weren't operational, so there's no even any air. So what happens is, and so we get the ship running, and we take our cargo to Nicaragua, and then they get Nicaraguan rum down the crew quarters, and then guess what? Now they start fighting, and then the machetes come out, and pretty soon one man's ear chopped off, I kind of laugh now, but it was just, that was the nature of the business. There would be payroll day, and there'd be a table smaller than this in a small village, and people sat around, and out comes 6 or 8 pistols and guns, and then a bunch of cash on the table as people discuss who's going to get paid. Mm-hmm. But that's kind of the environment I grew up as a teenager, and ultimately, the ship, Dad took it and did his best, and the ship ultimately ended up, I think, in Iran, believe it or not. What it did enable us to do was learn about people. I grew up on a ship with lots of volunteers, lots of people. I learned about motivating people, and I became an expert in direct reversible. And this story is really not about me, just about our family, but I became an expert in direct reversible engines, and ultimately came up here and started solving problems for people. And they were boat problems, but they generally weren't boat problems. They were people problems. The people weren't doing things right. They weren't treating the ship right. And I believe ships and boats and machinery have spirits. So that's my, just I kiss them, I hug them, and I pat them on the back. But we started managing for people, then soon thereafter we started owning the boats ourselves. For example, the port boat on the side of the Polar Sea. Cheryl and I had done a job here in Seattle on it, and we were owed, from a local attorney who bought the boat as an investment. He owed us $21,000. That was a lot of money in 1978. And he said, don't worry, I've sold the boat. I said, what's it? You owe us $21,000. He said, don't you worry. He said, you are going to get paid. And I said, we knew we could put a lien on the boat, but he said, give me 5 days. And so you're going to get a call. So we get a call. And they said, meet the new owners at Lake Union Dry Dock on the Polar Sea at 8 o'clock at night on a winter night. It was dark. And so we're down on the boat, and the shore power's on. And this guy comes on the boat, he's wearing a black trench coat, he's got a briefcase this big, and he's got $21,000 in cash in his briefcase. And so, and he was from Chicago. So guess what they did for a living? So, well, we managed the boat, and what we did is we had commercial business, and we just sent their 50 cents on the dollar to them, until one day they decided they wanted to take a family vacation down in Colombia, so they wanted the boat delivered to Colombia. So we delivered the boat to Colombia, and that's a whole nother story. The tug below, the tug with the barge, same thing. We were in the towboat business for 14 years, and you've got Frank Ellison here in the group, and who's a phenomenal guy, and he runs a great company. He's got way more experience in this than I do. But for 14 years, we're doing ocean towing. For example, the upper 2 tugs are single screw wooden boats, and we did fixed price towing to New York, to South America with a derrick barge from Manson Construction, to the Aleutian Islands. We took on the risk of weather, breakdown, anything could go wrong. It was fixed price in order to win the contracts. The boat down below with the barge, one time I got a call from Hines, who was running that boat, and with that barge, taking it to Anchorage, we had a regular run. And he said, it's a little rough. He's outside of Cape Spencer. And he said, it's a little rough out here. I said, Art, how rough? He said, I may have to turn around. And I said, well, I'm a single sideband. Every morning we're talking on the single sideband. It's scratchy as a single sideband used to be. And he goes, I've got swells over the top container. So take a look at the height on that. So he spun her around. He had probably 40, 50-foot swells, and spun around, went back inside of Spencer, and we waited for a few days. By the way, that boat, I'll just tell that story just real quick. This boat was one I bought on the bottom of the ocean. I bought it it sunk at the Verrazano Bridge in New York, and we picked it up for scrap, and then went back there to Staten Island with a team and rebuilt the ship in about 4 months. But there's another story associated with it. The boat was in Peru. As the market started to slow down in the towing business, I started leasing the tugs out on a bareboat basis rather than crude, and made our lives simpler, and we still got a revenue stream. And we owed CIT about $600,000 on this tug at the time, which is a lot. All personal guarantees, our homes are on the line, always have been in everything we've done practically. And the people in Peru said, we're not paying you any longer. The money it just stopped, and they owed us about 6 months of back charter hire. So I called Washington, D.C., and talked to the State Department, and they said, we can't help you. There's 3 other boats down there of U.S. owners, and we just can't help you. So we took self-help, and we went down to Peru, and we took the boat. She was tied to a super tanker, unloading oil off to the Peruvian coast. She had her tow wire up, and she was out 1.5 miles or 2 miles of unloading buoy. So we went down there with 5 people, and we boarded that boat in the middle of the night with baseball bats, and we took the crew, there was 10 crew on board, and stripped them naked, and then made sure that they didn't harm us as we let the tow go. And we made our way out, and we had to make sure the crew got back safely to shore, which is 2 or 3 miles. We also had to have an hour to get away safely, otherwise we didn't want the Navy to come after us. So we bribed them, this is what everybody else should do when they need an hour to get away, and offered them something in return, and they gave us about 30 minutes, and we departed and we left, and we made it to the Colombian border. So anyway, that tug continued to work for years. This is the ship, Willishank at the end. It gives the upper right corner is a beautiful picture of her in Newport Beach. We used to do kids camp. And not that many years later, wrong ship, wrong waters, wooden boat, warm waters, Torritos, and that's where she ended up in Rotan, Honduras at the time. Rotan today is a tourist destination. Back then it was not. There was the Nicaraguan conflict going on. It was a drug-centered, CIA-centered area. But my folks chose to end up there at the end of the day with this ship, and she sank. But they wouldn't leave the boat. My father would not. He said, couldn't leave it behind. He'd had that ship for 40 years. And so my mother was very unhappy. So Cheryl and I, we put our business on hold for about 6 weeks and got a couple of volunteers to go with us. Packed up quite a bit of equipment down there. and set ourselves up. It went down to Honduras, and Dad had already raised the boat. So then we put her together and got her back in one piece, and then brought her, sailed her back to Los Angeles until we sold the boat. And there's stories in between there. All our planking took time to seal up. Whoever's had wood boats knows it takes time for the seams to seal and so forth, and we didn't have that kind of time. We had to get out of there. We had some heavy weather along the Mosquito Coast off of Nicaragua, which at that time you didn't want to get dropped in Nicaragua because it was a very conflict zone. But anyway, the vessel almost sank with our 2 children and Cheryl and I and about 14 others aboard, and there's all kinds of stories surrounding that, but it's an interesting story. We ended up buying some scrap ships. They were scrap 200-foot fishing vessels in Seattle, and we turned them into highliners in the Bering Sea. And we were shore-based delivering, and we would catch up to 1 million pounds a day, just some of the things we do. Then our children were growing up, and we wanted them to participate in working with their hands and participate on the boats. And Cheryl and I love working together, building things. And on the commercial side, that's not so easy. So we said, you know what? My brother Don had started the Super Yacht Show down in Kirkland. And we had seen this, and we go, you know what? That would be kind of fun. We had no money, but let's give it a try. So we said, we're the Sanford and Son of the boat business. Some people call us that, or dock rats at times. And so we said, okay, what we'll do is we have to find these boats for nothing, because that's what we do, and then we create value. And what we have done generally is when someone looks at something and they go, that is way too much risk for me, we look at it and go, do we have the knowledge, do we have the experience, do we have the capital to take on that risk that others may not want to take on, and can we benefit from it? Sometimes it's a yes, and other times it's a no, and sometimes it's just stupid. But we've done some things. So anyway, we bought this boat. She had sunk in Indonesia, and the mates will like this. It's a husband and wife team who were running the ship at the time. It was the most expensive yacht built in the United States. The captain held the license, the wife had the brains. And so what happened was she was a navigator, and she'd taken 2 weeks off to be with family in Europe, and this is over in Fiji, and he ran the boat, and he ran on a reef, and damaged it and sunk her. And there she is there, and there. How do you like that? And that's salon. It was pretty cool. Yeah, the lower staterooms. So we picked her up and stripped her and brought her to Seattle. And that's what she looked like when we got done. Interior.
Nice.
Yeah, pretty. It's fun. It's creative. We're kind of like, we may not paint or play musical instruments, but what we do is we do something with the maritime field that's unique and kind of one-off. It's a little bit of art for us. We couldn't replicate it. We couldn't do it with 50 ships or 2,000 people. It can't be done. It'd be something different. But once again, this whole, I think this talk is about the people that allow us to do these things. These things happen because of a tremendous amount of commitment on the part of others, not ourselves, and how valuable that is and what that truly means. So, here's another tug. She was a tug in Greece, and it was a salvage tug. And we bought her in this condition, slightly better than that, so it's not quite fair, a little bit better than this, and she was unfinished. And we did this in New Zealand, and that's her in a completed state. And this is another vessel that had a fire, Delta. She was called the Marjorie Morningstar, a 145-footer that we bought. That's in our boat shed down in Lake Union in Ballard. This was her. She had a fire, and she was a total loss as well. And that's her when we completed her. But just fun stuff, right? We never made much money in that field. We chartered those vessels, so we did. We chartered them from Alaska to Galapagos when they build up a value after a couple of years and a reputation. Because everyone knows a boat sunk. Everyone knows it had a fire. So you're not going to get away from that. So, but once it got a better reputation, we could possibly, break even or make a few dollars and pay for it. This is a recent one. This is our sailboat just coming off a ship. This is us de-rigging her. And that hook height on that crane is 200 feet, and that mast is 150 feet tall. But once again, people say, oh no, you gotta go to a specialist for that. You gotta go somewhere in Europe or this and that. We can figure this out. And we did. And so this was us. We put a fly bridge on the boat. Before she didn't have a fly bridge. There's no flying bridge there. And we did aluminum work, and we laid it out with blue tape, just like you can figure out a house, right? And where you want to put the galley, where you put the kitchen cabinets, and so off we go. And then we put the flying bridge on it. A few of you were on the boat, I think, up in Friday Harbor, or in Roach Harbor, not too long ago, but that's her. This is another project we did where we took the center line of a fishing trawler. Now, this is not the fishing trawler because we didn't have a picture, but it was similar. We cut the middle 100 feet out. It's kind of like we take your heart out and then we give you a new head and new waist down. And that's what we did with this ship. And we built the Global Explorer here. And it's interesting because when we got done, we built it for the fiber optic business. It was a real need. Well, in 2002, the fiber optic business shut down. It was like a dead stop. I mean, lights off. And all of a sudden we had a ship with nowhere to go. We had a lot of money into it. And so we modified it. And I said, well, I think we can go in the oil and gas business. And they go, well, you can put this on charter, but her age is too old. Because you have a new ship, but that center 100 feet has got a 1980 keel, you get a 1980 build date on the boat. And I go, we can't live with that because we could get $15,000 a day at one, but $25,000 the other way. So we went to our lobbyists in Washington, D.C., and we had everyone should like this, because I'm trying to get this done for myself right now. We had a bill passed in Congress that said the boat was brand new, it was built in 2002, and got it passed. So now she had a new date on her document, and off we went to work. So I'm working that on my birth certificate, so if I can get it to say I was born in 1974, I figured I'm gonna be good for a few more years. So this is one of our ships, the Alpha Helix. Like I said, we work up in the Arctic, and Chukchi, the Beaufort, out east and very high north. Sometimes we'll stay on a site in an area a month past everybody else. So we'll be this area we're at here is probably 3,000 miles above the Dutch Harbor, above the oceans. It's quite high. And so and it's pretty lonely up there when you're on a boat. And everyone else has gone home. There's no more tugs, there's no more barges. Everyone else has gone home, and we stay late. We play the ice because we're doing science work, and we stay as late as we possibly can. That's one of our ships in the Antarctic, and Antarctic is the Moana Wave. And that ship, one day we were working down there, and we got a call from the captain on the satellite. He goes, hey, I've lost one of the radars. I said, well, is it a magnetron? What is it? He goes, no, I've lost the radar, the whole thing, and the 10-inch post that's 12 feet tall that goes with it. And we go, well, what in the world? He goes, he's pretty rough, John Seville. John, how rough is rough? He says, well, we're behind an iceberg right now, but it's blowing 120 knots. And you see the seas outside are 70. So it was just a bad storm. We don't try and stay in those areas, but that happens. You get caught. Sometimes you don't have a choice. We're 3 days back from Punta Arenas and that type of thing in Chile. So, interesting story. This is I'm going to play this. This is one of our research ships, the Ocean Star, and kind of a unique thing. I'll just show it to you. I don't know if you can hear it, but it's I don't know if any of you know about the gyre out there that's supposed to be out in the middle of the Pacific with the debris and all that. And there's a company called Ocean Cleanup run by a young, Dutch guy. So they came to us and said, we need to go out and prove that there's debris out in the middle of the Pacific. So we designed the nets in the system, and then we sent one of our research ships out there along with some of their volunteers from Europe. And our weather's not always as nice, but that's the Ocean Star, and we're helping them trawl the gyre for debris and sort of prove their theories, their thesis, right? That's what's going on. Those are our designs, and we don't always do that kind of thing, but like it was a one-off type of a thing, and then we designed that net. This was their video for themselves, right? So. I'll speed it up here. There you go. So this is one of our ships that we bought in Malaysia. It was for a large construction contract, and during a dry dock period, we're having some work done in Singapore. And the company that we're working for, ST Marine, owned by the Singaporean government, puts the ship in the water, opens her up, and said, "Don't worry, we'll put you back in dry dock, but we can do this safely." We had 35 crew aboard, and sleeping, and they didn't know the ship was sinking until she leaned over and some of them started falling out of their bed. And they had a 40-person evening crew working on the ship that had listed her over, and they saw the water coming in. They all abandoned it, did not notify any of our crew at all. Daniel was managing that project. He was in Singapore, and I got a call. He said, "Dad, I don't know what's happening. I'm on my way to the ship right now, but it's very, very serious." And it was a full, interesting program. Here we go. Ocean Stalwart, research ship of ours. Same thing. She was working Brazil, Uruguay. Same thing. If we go to Uruguay and then we go to the Falklands and we come back to Uruguay, we're seized and thrown in jail. So there's so many variables in our business. You got to kind of plan for them the best you can. This ship was good after a 5-year contract was to be bought by the Brazilian government, by the Navy. They were so excited. They invited us to Rio. We put her up on the dock at Rio, cleared in. And they were actually putting their name on the boat. They were measuring for all the new equipment. It was waiting for one admiral's signature. 2 days later, the National Police, what do they call the National Police there?
I forget it.
Yeah, whatever it was, they were in a fight with the Brazilian Navy. They both show up, machine guns. Our crew's in the middle. There's guns pointed at one another. Our captain and our mate is arrested, put in jail. And they said we entered the country illegally. Here we are. And so long story short, it had to be solved in Brasilia at the highest levels. So once again, politics had entered into our business as well. This is the USS Grayback on a project. We work on a project with one of our ships called the Lost 52, and that's finding the Lost 52 submarines from World War II and their crews. So we do some searching around the Pacific right now for that, and this is one of the submarines that we found, the USS Grayback. That's the research ship, the Ocean Titan, that does some of that work. This is a recent picture. She just left for the East Coast. She's in Charleston, working off the East Coast somewhere. And this is I'll play this real quick. What we do is we carry, for this project for 5 years, we carried a 250 horsepower remote operated vehicle that goes down to 4,500 meters. It's a very commercial vehicle with manipulator arms that can do a tremendous amount. We also carry a 4,500 meter autonomous underwater vehicle called a Hugin, and that can go off to 15, 20 miles away from the vessel, and it talks back to us through underwater technology that we have on the bottom of our ship. And so what we can do is go survey large areas, and we have the deep water technology to go find things that others have not been able to find in the past. This is one of our control rooms of the ship. So you're paying attention a lot to electronic data. And this ship was a scrap. We bought this ship for scrap from NOAA. They were selling it because they needed another new ship. By the way, a new ship to replace this from NOAA was $140 million, and I think they sold it to us for $1 million because it was not worthwhile. So this is how we retrieve the Hugin, sending a line gun out. Once again, this is distance. I think we're probably 8,000 miles away from Seattle while we're doing this job. So we have to prepare. And that means the right parts, the right materials, the right people, the right attitudes. It's a tremendous amount about the people. And of course, it's the stories we tell them and they tell themselves about why they're doing this job, what it means to them. And it has a lot to do with the emotions. And of course, it's our story. We like doing these types of things. So I'm looking at my lessons learned list to make sure I don't leave anything out. So I dream, but be prepared to pay the price, emotionally, financially, and spiritually. Dream and recognize the price that others also will have to pay as well in their sacrifice for you, for your ideas and schemes. And important lessons when ships, the ocean, men and women are the key ingredients to success. So here's an ocean constructor. She's a 425 by 90 foot wide ship that's been working for us. And last year she had 265 souls aboard, and she had a fire in her number 5 engine room. An oil line to her turbocharger broke, putting hot oil onto a hot engine, already hot engine, and caused a tremendous fire. It was out of control. We had a crew of 25 who contained the fire to that space, and they deboarded while it was out of control, and they were fighting the fire. They deboarded deboarded 240 industrial personnel and got them off the ship. And then they continued to fight the fire for another 24 hours, fought it successfully, and they're exhausted. I met the boat down in Mexico, and Daniel was on charge of the other big losses, but this one I went and met the boat in Mexico when they came into port near Veracruz. And those are the team, and those are the key officers who led 20 other men or 21 other men to a successful conclusion. Not a broken fingernail, no injuries whatsoever. Here's a ship that we bought. Once again, we buy somebody else's scrap. It was owned by a large subsea company. They said it's not worth fixing up. We can't take the risk. And so we, on spec, took the risk and bought the ship. And of course, it was about 200,000 man hours. Daniel managed this project, and it's called the Ocean Intrepid. She's 105 feet wide, 104, 105 feet deep. She clears the Panama, did clear the Panama Canal by about a foot. And then she's about 400 feet long, and she dynamically positions. Our ships are DP2, which means that they're computer controlled. It's not man-related. They have multiple sources, so you can have a fire in one space and take out a computer. The ship still has to maintain its position. For example, the Ocean Valor that I showed you, we had divers down at 1,000 feet in hard suits here last year working underneath it. So it's very important that the ships stay within 3 feet, a meter where it's supposed to be. This Ocean Intrepid now, I'll put it back here, was on a contract just recently. She finished up about 1,200 days, over 26,000 hours on site, not 1 hour of downtime working. She never came to port once. And things break. They always break. It's a boat. So, but it's the people that keep it maintained. We even rebuild our engines while we're staying in dynamically position 2, which is not simple to do. It's very complex. And we're working, as you can see in the lower picture, right up against oil platforms. She's now providing the accommodation service for a short period during Ida, but she's scheduled November 1st. There was a large explosion on an oil well in Mexico for Pemex about a month ago. She's scheduled to go down for the repairs for that explosion and that damage. So once again, I'm trying to make sure we got it. These are our teams. These are just some of the teams. And these are just a fraction of the people that are involved that make our dreams come true and that allow us to do what we do safely. And I think that's what my message really all is about appreciating those who give up to us and allow us to do what we do and serve us. I'm gonna see if I've got anything else. Oh, no, that's it. No, we had a ship taken by pirates in Nigeria, but that's another story. I'm gonna take if you don't mind, I'm just gonna look at my final thing. I put, be careful to value yourself, because if you do not, others will not value. As the project size increases, so does the commitment level required of everyone involved. Be careful what you are asking of not only yourself, but of others. Hurricanes, sinkings, piracy, discoveries, and the value of the grace that allows us to navigate through the difficult as well as the smooth passages of life. So here we are today, 50 years later, from the day as a young boy headed out of the Ballard Locks on board the Minesweeper into the Pacific swells, headed south to new directions in life. I had no clue then as to how little I knew. And today, with years of experience in both success and failure, I am much more aware of how really little I do know about so many things. But there's been a tremendous number of lessons learned and so many questions yet to be answered. Nothing is better than going on an adventure with your best friend. There's a time for collecting and building, and then there comes a time to work at letting go. A time to begin in serious, passing the lessons we have learned on to the next generation and those who care to listen. That we would never give up the difficult times, as those have been the most instructive, sobering, and beneficial in teaching us what it is to succeed and fail. So many successes have not been what I thought, and so many perceived failures have brought so much. That it's all about the people. I have become the dreamer, yet it's the men and the women who turn those dreams into reality, often at great cost amidst fear, anxiety, hurricanes, typhoons, and uncertainty at sea. That the ocean and the wonder of nature that engulfs it is a wonderful teacher if we approach her with the right attitude and respect. And a reminder in myself, let me do this one. I put my family in there because it's the next generation for us. And a reminder to myself and those around us that there is nothing better than setting your course in life, and at the end of the watch, being able to look over the stern at the long straight wake astern and know you chose well along the way. So there we are. That's the end of my presentation.
Watching your presentation and listening to you talk, I couldn't help but be overwhelmed by the parallels of our lives. Early on, and you talked about that when you were a young boy that you slept in a bedroom, and I also slept in a bedroom. It's the same person. Can we turn the lights up? I don't know if I'm talking to. There we go. Let's put a pass Commodore on it. Thank you. Do we have any questions? I think we have time for just a few questions for Dan. Do you have any questions for Dan? Put your hand up if you'd like to ask a question.
How many names did you go through before you named your son?
A lot.
The question is, how many names did you go through before you named your son? Thank you.
That's a great question. We'll get therapy together and I'll tell you about it. Yeah, yes.
Anyone else? Back here.
Do you have a favorite ship?
I do have a favorite ship right now. It's a small one. It's a little one, but it's KR. It's our sailboat.
Tell a little bit more about KR. I think you showed a picture, but
I did. We bought a sailing yacht that we owned some power boats, as you saw, but we bought a small. We wanted a boat that could go around the world and yet was small enough to be intimate, and yet it could take our children, grandchildren, and friends. It's all about the people. So we bought a sailing yacht. It was our first time, and then it needed a lot of work. Once again, a complex vessel where people didn't want to take the risk of putting the money into fixing it up. So we bought it and made the repairs in our own shipyard and modified the vessel. And so now she's on the dry dock now. We're doing some work on her before we leave. But once again, it's about enjoying the ocean with the people that you love, and the experiences is no different than if you were on a 17-foot, bayliner. It's wonderful, just fantastic. And so that's what we're doing.
Dan,
thank you.
I know your other.
I have a question over here.
That was in the yacht club.
Yeah, we're partners. We're partners with Noel and George in Perla, which was Roaring Forth, which was a boat from the yacht club as well. A fantastic boat, cared for by wonderful people, by the Roars.
I'm interested. What's the scariest experience you've had at sea?
Oh. Well, one time Cheryl and I, we had a cruise ship called the Centurion Corinthian, and we were on the Exxon Valdez bill for 3 years as the command ship. And we were bringing it home, and we misread the weather. And we were coming across the Gulf of Alaska. Right behind us was another tug, on a 100-foot tug a friend of ours had, towing a barge with 6 crew members. In fact, one of our crew members was scheduled to go home on his relief to Louisiana, and he asked if he could go with the tug behind us just to make some extra money on his time off. And we said, sure. So we left and we departed, and the weather came up quite bad. It was so bad we couldn't turn the 200-footer around. So we had to power up the swells and pull the power off on the big electromotive diesels as we went down the swells. And we did that for about 18 hours. It was very rough. Daniel was on the boat, our 3 children, we had 14, 15 people. It was a big boat, carried 80 guests, and plus a helicopter pad and all that, plus a crew. And it was so rough that Daniel was coming up the pilot house demanding that we turn the ship around. Turn this around. There's nothing we could do. And so we made it behind Kayak Island and safely. And we waited out 12 or 14 hours, and then we popped into Cape Spencer. The tug behind us didn't, they all died because of the weather. So that was a scary situation.
Thank you. Thanks so much, Dan.
Great job.
So Dan's brought several members of his family